Welcome to the Entree Pastors Podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Entree Pastors Podcast on YouTube. My name is John Sanders. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and you're getting ready to watch episode number 18, in which myself and my other co-host, Les Hughes, we have a conversation with a pastor who has gone from the pulpit out to making presentations in corporate settings. He has a really interesting story of how he transitioned out of traditional pastoral ministry and into an interesting role that has him out in corporate settings doing various presentations for different companies and doing really well with that. And actually, well, I don't want to tell all this story. You'll hear how he talks about kind of transitioning back into a more traditional role of ministry, as well as now doing some of these things for himself as his own business. So his name is Scott Hobbs. The title of this episode is From the Pulpit to Presenting to Corporations. And I know you're in for some good stuff here, guys. So thanks for tuning in. Without any further ado, let's check out this interview that Les and I did with Pastor Scott Hobbs. Here we go. Well, Scott, welcome to the Entree Pastors Podcast, my friend. It's an honor having you on the show.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, well, I am so excited to unpack your story with our audience here today. I'll give a little backstory, and then you can fill in the details. We'll start in just a minute by having you introduce yourself to our audience. But for years now, I've been a listener to Dan Miller's 48 Days to the Work You Love podcast, and a number of times in recent years, I've heard him mention this story about a pastor that he helped transition out of traditional pastoral ministry into doing, presentations for various corporations and being pretty profitable at that. And I've always been curious, I wonder what I'd like to know more about that. And then you you totally outed yourself in our Facebook community. You said, I'm the guy that Dan talks about. So I was so excited to reach out to you and hear that story. So we'll get there, but why don't we start with just an introduction? Where are you at in the world? Tell us about your journey into pastoral ministry.
Okay. Well, my family and I live in Northwest Arkansas. And we have pastored in Texas as well as the Chicago area, and returned back to this, our home state a couple of years ago. And but I pastored overseas for a few years, and then I pastored primarily in the Chicago area. I was up there for 18 years, and so pretty typical kind of pastoral ministry, traditional church setting for the most part. Except for, we made quite a few changes and transitions through the years as things have evolved. But I've been a pretty traditional, typical go to college, go to seminary, and get a church and do full-time ministry. I've been doing that for almost 30 years at this point.
Yeah. So are you like a Chicago Cubs, Bears fan?
The Cubs. We're Cubs fans. We adopted them when we were up there. Yep.
Yeah, I grew up in Central Illinois for a large part of my life, so I kind of have a soft place in my heart for the old Cubbies too. So
right, yeah. We enjoyed Chicago a lot.
Yeah, well, let's go into this a little bit more. Then again, I know Dan's version of the story, and it's basically here's a pastor that just kind of got worn out, tired of the grind of pastoral ministry, and we helped him transition into something different. So tell us about that. Tell us about that journey of leaving that and going into a new realm of ministry.
Right. Well, we, like I said, after quite a few years of ministry, we decided it was a time for us to kind of return back home to our home state. We have 3 boys, and our 2 younger ones in particular, we wanted to get back to our home state and get them connected with grandparents and all that before they got too old and, connected in that part of the world. So that was a part of the impetus of us making the transition back. But the last couple of years of my ministry, I just began thinking in the Chicago area, began thinking about just different opportunities. And I'd been at the church for like 18 years. We've seen a lot of good things happen. but it just felt like it was a transition time for us, And I had thought probably 10 years earlier, I had thought about the possibilities of teaching seminars and making those kinds of presentations in the secular setting, corporations, and even just local things, but I had never really acted on it. And through the influence of Dan Miller, who we all know well and are acquainted with, his books primarily, and one of his events I attended also, kind of got me thinking more aggressively about it. And I started teaching one of his seminars about work transitions. He has I forget the title of it right now, but I taught that locally there for a couple of times to kind of dabble in the experience. And then when we moved back to Arkansas, I began looking at it more seriously. And so I unplugged from the ministry for a time there, and kind of reevaluated, thought it through, where I was headed, what was priorities, just kind of took a breather, after those almost 30 years. And that's when I started moving toward the seminars through a company that I've worked for a year and a half or so now. And then slowly I plugged back into ministry and serving as a pastor, interim pastor, which I've been doing for some time now. And then continuing to develop the work of teaching seminars. And now on top of that, I now have a larger position now where I'm basically executive director for an association of churches, 65 Baptist churches in our area in Northwest Arkansas. So I'm doing that in addition.
I want to summarize that story, just the bullet points. So you were in traditional pastoral ministry, you stepped out of that, had a season where you're doing these presentations for various corporations, presenting seminars. Right. Then you circled back into pastoral ministry, not the senior pastor role or the lead pastor role, but interim, and then now you're over, you have a role with a whole network of churches. So, but at the same time, you're also building out your own business, doing these presentations for corporations, not just working for someone else. Is that a fair summary, kind of the elevator story?
That is it, very much so. And my working with the company, which I continue to do that when they call on me pretty regularly, and I can say yes or no to what they offer me to do. But on top of that, I've started building it locally, what I was doing for them more or less nationally. I started doing that in my local area now. And that's proven that's more lucrative, when you do it on your own, without them taking their cut of the of the profits or whatever. And so that's another piece of it.
Yeah.
So Scott,
yes.
Is that with a what we would think of as a speakers bureau, or doing different talks or seminars for different companies, or is it just primarily one company that you're one of the spokespeople for?
It's one company that I work for. There are two main companies in the United States that do this, and they're both located in the same town in Kansas City. And, they do a tremendous number of seminars. As pre-COVID, just it's amazing, like 1,000 a month or something. They're doing so many of these seminars across the United States. That might be a little exaggerated, but it's a surprisingly high number of seminars that they teach.
For different companies.
Two different things. One, prior to COVID, they did public seminars. And then also they did it for specific companies. So those two different types.
Okay.
The public seminars were, they would advertise for businesses, individuals, and they would come. So you'd have a group of anywhere from maybe 20, in larger cities, I'd have up to 90, that would be in one conference room. And they would come from all different companies coming for some training, provide for their personnel.
Right.
And that's the public. And then there's for the individual companies that enlist the company I work for to send a trainer to do specific training for them.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So those are the two veins that they work in usually.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to save part of this conversation for our backstage, where we're going to do a deep dive, if you're okay, Scott, into the process. What I want to do here is share the high level story as how Dan tells it. And then we'll get into the deeper processes backstage, because I know this is going to cause some people to lean in. But here's how Dan tells the story on a podcast. When I've heard him share it, he'll basically say, you've got a pastor that's been in ministry, just tired of the grind of ministry, the expectations. Now we helped him transition into a place where he's doing presentations and seminars for these different corporations. And, he's making, $2,000 at an event, $2,000 a pop, and goes and speaks one day, and he might get 10 of those in a month. And so then Dan will say, you do the math on that. So again, I'm sitting here going, I'm not good at math, but I can do that math.
Right.
And his point is, man, for the average pastor hearing that, like what a breath of relief in terms of what normal pastoral ministry looks like. So we'll save that for the later conversation.
Oh, what a tease. Jon, you have no shame.
About how to get into that. But I want to back up in your story just a minute. One question that comes to my mind, Scott, is you were at that point of thinking about doing something different. Did you wrestle with anything internally? Was there any kind of internal or even external voices of guilt, or how can you step away from ministry to go do something else? Or did you have a pretty healthy approach to that?
I don't think I struggled with it. I had some compelling reasons to make a transition with my family. So to me, that trumps everything, to do the best I can for my family, minister to them more than anything. That's my first priority. So that was a motivation for me to make a transition back and to unplug. So I really didn't struggle with that. I had an occasional awkward conversation with somebody when they would say, so you're not pastoring anymore,
not ministry anymore.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So I had to kind of learn how to frame that, and when I left the church too, I think they felt, like, I don't know what they thought, but things go through your mind, like maybe, they think you're leaving the ministry, all that, that kind of stereotypical kind of thinking. So I don't think I struggled with guilt. I think a couple of things. I was really compelled by the need to do it. And two, I'd been at it for a long time. And I think I just knew I needed to unplug and then see how I would plug back in again later.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And I wanted to tap into that tension, not so much for you, but for others in our audience that are wrestling with that. Because I know I went through that twice. First of all, when I went back into full-time firefighting, in addition to being a pastor, I felt that internal guilt or pressure. And then certainly as I transitioned out of that senior pastor role into a new form of ministry, I really had to work through some stuff and have some of those awkward conversations that you mentioned, where people would say, oh, do you not love God anymore? Or, is everything okay in your life? You're not a pastor. What's going on? So I appreciate you calling out your family as being a higher priority than the calling to ministry.
Yeah. And it had been a process, leading before that for, a couple of years of kind of making peace with the fact that, ministry is broader than just having a job at a church, and I think Dan Miller's insights along those lines, coming from the background that he comes from, kind of caused me, enabled me to think a little bit more broadly about what ministry looks like.
Yeah, I want to say this. Hold on, Les. I want to say this louder for the people in the back that weren't listening. I just want to repeat that statement. Ministry is broader than just having a job in a church. Go ahead, Les.
There you go. Oh, amen. Well, I tell you what, if you would talk about that, I'm real interested now in this role as in your executive director role, because I know what that consists of as well, and how you're really speaking into so many of these pastors now and the congregations that they shepherd. So it's interesting to me that you, what kind of parameters did you set going in, because I'm sure there are some, because those are pretty hefty roles, but Jon and I both really encourage people to just have these multiple streams of income, especially for a pastor who's gifted normally in so many different areas, or they couldn't lead at that capacity, especially for as long 3 decades as you did. So what were some of those parameters that you set early on, I guess, in that role. And or is that what we would call a full-time role as well, or are there different expectations?
Well, it's definitely a full-time role.
Yeah, I figured it was.
But it's at the same time, it has a lot of leeway. It's kind of my own making. It's just like one of those things that you can make the most out of, and I very much intend to do that. Or you can do the minimal, that type thing. So, but it's a little bit unique in pastoring because I don't have that. I don't have that late night call, or I don't have that every Sunday morning responsibility. So it enables me to have a little more freedom and to open myself up to, to possibilities like this. So it's a little less of a demand on a regular basis than pastoring. I'm working, I'm dovetailing it slowly. I'm kind of new in the role, so I am trying to fashion it in such a way that I could do this and continue to do this. But I don't want to be perceived in the beginning by my pastors as that I'm always out doing something else instead of working for them. So I'm trying to manage that a little bit right now.
Sure.
But
I
I don't see it as a conflict at all. I see it as enhancing.
Sure.
And as it evolves, once they come to understand how I function and those things that I have to do, I'll unveil more of what I'm doing elsewhere too as well. But it's kind of a slow process right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I love that tension that you're speaking to, because really our content that we're putting out here, Scott, is really in two directions. One, it's that pastor that just needs to be out of pastoral ministry. We want them to have a healthy transition into a new season of ministry beyond the local church. And it's also to the pastor who wants to do both. And so there is that tension when you're doing full-time pastoring and then some other entrepreneurial business pursuit. Like, you have a foot in both worlds, and it does create a tension that has to be managed. So I appreciate you just speaking to that. I have a couple more questions going back a little bit in your story, Scott. When you transitioned into this new role, first of all, I want to talk about how did your pastoral skill set and the skill set you used for pastoral ministry, how did that prepare you, or how well did that transition into being a presenter of soft skills, as you're
Right.
at these corporations? Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, you can't get any more exact of a connection, between the work that you do as a preacher and teacher, and the work that I'm doing now. So it's pretty much one of those things that was a pretty smooth transition. I mean, and the neat thing about it is that a lot of the things that I have taught through the years and preached through the years, now I'm getting to teach them in a secular setting, and, those insights and stories, and, it's not explicitly biblical, but it is biblical.
Right.
And so it very much translates very easily, because that's what my strength is. And so that's what I wanted to stay in.
Yeah.
So, but it was easy in that regard. It has a few differences, little nuances that are different, like sometimes we work out of workbooks and I say, well, turn to page number 3. And I tend to say, turn to verse number 3 instead of page number 3. So I get caught up in that every once in a while. But and a few people in the crowd pick up on that and go, oh, I think I know where this guy's coming from, But so anyway, it's a very much an equal, the two roles are very similar.
Yeah. Did you ever accidentally take an offering when you were done with one of those things?
No, but I've had some unique experiences. It's people, they detect something in you, as a pastor when you're there. And even though I'm talking about practical things about getting along with different personality types and so forth and so on, or leadership principles, they just kind of detect that there's some kind of pastoral intent here. And so a lot of times they'll come up to me afterwards. I've had people come up to me and basically ask me to pray for them and things like that, even though I hadn't mentioned the Lord at all during the presentation. And I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah. That just kind of lends itself to the idea that there's sometimes just as much, if not more, ministry happening outside the walls of the church in the marketplace sometimes than even inside. But one last question I have for you, Scott, when you and I were talking a few weeks ago, you mentioned just kind of this relief or kind of refreshing season when you're out of that. And it resonated with me because I'm recently in that place too. And I kind of hesitate. I'll be honest, this has been one of my struggles with my other platform that I do. It's to pastors, and I kind of hesitate to talk about how awesome life is outside of pastoral ministry, because my goal isn't to get a bunch of pastors to quit. But I resonated with what you said about just going into a season of refreshing, like, there's a burden that is lifted, a weight off my shoulders. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what was that like for you in this season of being in the marketplace, not having all of the weight of a local church on your shoulders?
Yeah. Well, of course, that was, refreshing to have, to come out from under some of the responsibilities, but also it's refreshing, just to take what we believe, as Christians and as pastors, and put it into practice in the marketplace. And that's what refreshes me the most, is when two parts to it. One is very helpful to people that aren't exposed to some of these ideas because they're not in church, so that's two. And it also is refreshing because they're very, very receptive and not necessarily, like the church world sometimes is very expects a lot out of you, and they expect you to show up. They expect you to do certain things. But what I've encountered there outside of the church world is that just kind of like a appreciation, like, hey, this is neat. I've never heard this before. Thank you. So that part of it was very refreshing to me as well. So does that answer your question?
Yeah,
it does. It sure does. And that's probably a good place to transition there, Scott, because we do want to dive a little deeper. For those that would like to go deeper, we're going to go into the backstage now in just a few minutes and get a little bit into the weeds, but I'm looking forward to that part of this conversation as well. So Jon, I'll turn it back over to you, and we can make that transition.
Well, yeah. So I guess I would just say, Scott, before we sign off, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, you are in our free Facebook community. You're active there, and so people can find you there. But if someone wanted to connect with you, what's another way, or what's the best way for them to reach out?
Just through the Facebook. That'd be fine. That'd be the best way to do it.
Awesome. Well, Scott, we want to thank you for your time coming on the show and sharing your story. We love sharing the stories of entree pastors that are figuring it out, what it looks like to have a foot in both worlds, and it's ministry no matter where you go. So thanks for your willingness to come on and share that with us, my friend.
Sure. You're welcome. And I enjoyed it very much.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the Entree Pastors Podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the Entree Pastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our Entree Pastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own Entree Pastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at entrepastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.